5 years ago, Myanmar's military launched a bloody crackdown on Rohingyas. They're a long persecuted, predominantly Muslim ethnic minority in the country. The military called what it did clearance operations against a rebel group that had attacked police posts. But human rights groups say security forces burnt down villages, killed thousands of people, and raped women and girls. In the months that followed, more than 700,000 Rohingyas fled their homes to seek refuge in Bangladesh, where more than 1 million of them have been living since refugee camps were formed there in 2017. Now, Canada was one of the first countries to declare Myanmar military's actions a genocide, but my next guest says this country's response has recently been stagnant as Rohingya refugees continue to be deprived of basic services. Rais Tinmung is the founder and board chair of the Rohingya Human Rights Network. He's on the phone with us this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Steve.
So you're regularly in touch with some Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. What have they been saying to you about the life that they are living, what it looks like for them 5 years after they first fled to safety?
Absolutely. We run a small operation of education and vocational training at the refugee camp, so I'm constantly in touch with them. We always have difficulties with carrying on operations smoothly because education is not legally permissible in the refugee camps. And economic activity is also very restricted, so we always continuously face hurdles 5 years down the line, or even, let's say, 40 years down the line, because the refugee camps were established in 1978. So education has always been a challenge. It's just by policy, very strange policy, that we not have education permissible in the camps. There's a small bit that they are permitted for registered refugees, quote unquote, because majority of us are unregistered. The whole idea is Rohingya people are transient. They're only here only in Bangladesh for temporary stay, and I can understand that idea because Bangladesh, being a very large populous country, has difficulty, with its own population. They don't want to add another 1 million. But the fact of the matter is we've been there for the longest time, and God knows how long we'll have to be there with what's happening in Myanmar. No other place would you have a grave human right like this violated, the way it's done.
And it wouldn't be possible to establish some sort of school or teaching system that doesn't put an extra drain on the Bangladesh education, department's resources. Let specially trained teachers or teachers from within the population carry the teaching so that the rest of the population, the broader country in which this refugee camp is located, isn't affected. That wouldn't be possible.
As a matter of fact, a lot of initiatives that were recently shut down were by Rohingya survivors themselves. So the initiatives that we support, the charity that we have here in Canada, it's a very small charity, and we support a set of grassroots initiatives, survivor teachers who run Burmese curriculum. But sadly, a lot of those community-based schools, education and learning centers, were also closed. So that is a very big hit on the vast majority of Rohingya who are now living in refugee camps. So it is absolutely possible. UNHCR is the agency that is primarily in charge of the refugee population. They're currently, as a matter of fact, running a small pilot project, except it's very small. It only reaches out to a specific number of kids. We have 500,000 kids who are deprived of education. So they could take over if given permission to run these education facilities. There will be no drain whatsoever or no strain whatsoever on Bangladesh system.
What are the challenges of doing that? I mean, it sounds mainly like it's political work that needs to be done to convince the local authorities that this teaching won't harm the local population.
Absolutely. It's certainly a matter of political will. And also, I believe, because politics is involved here, there's international pressure or international relations that also can play a role. So here's where I come in as an advocate over here, and a very privileged Rohingya living in the most beautiful country in the world. We are demanding our government that, hey, if we can make certain leverage points with the Bangladeshi government and all Bangladeshi authorities out there, because there's so many sympathizers in the government. As a matter of fact, hats off to the Bangladeshi people for all that they have done and continue to do. If it was not for the Bangladeshi government and the Bangladeshi people, we would have probably been drowned in that river in Taknaf, or just destroyed in the villages. Just using that leverage to take it one notch up to allow this education to happen, which I see is a no-brainer.
Can you give me some kind of a broader sense, Royce? I mean, I understand the challenge of education and how that's sort of your main focus, but what is the life these people have been living for 5 years?
Well, it's a very crowded, squalid, dense refugee camps. You're looking at very small, let's say 5 by 5, 5 feet by 5 feet little rooms. The average family size is 7 people, 8 people, and you've got them all dense. You're talking about 1 million people that are dense in an area as big as, let's say, Canada, where you've got shared washrooms. All the aid agency poured in 2017, right after the massacre. Right prior to that, when aid was all dried up, and it is going in that direction at the moment, by the way. I remember walking into one of these latrines with housefly larvae all over the place, and worms crawling. Kids would just walk in bare feet, and they drink water from dirty lakes and dirty reservoirs. Infant mortality is off the roof. The last time I was there, people were talking about what is dentistry, is if they get medical aid, that's a big deal. If there's something specialty in healthcare that they require, if it really warrants attention, they're taken out of the camps. But if not, they live with it, and that's their reality.
And you say aid has dried up where from the point it was at 5 years ago. What's happening there?
The last message from UNHCR, it's about 50% of 880 million. It's a large sum of money to run all of that operation, sustain, 1 million people, and 400,000 host community. We should not forget the host community that's been very generous already, and they are very poor themselves, So for this 1.4 million people, 880 million was their target for 2022, but only half of it has been attained, and that translates down to basic services, to food, water, medical necessities, of course, no education, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't like this before. I remember advocating or when Canada's fiscal year was coming, we were pushing for funding renewal, and at that time they were appealing for like 70%. Done, 30% remaining, stuff like that, but now we're at 50%, so you can see the trend going that way.
I wonder what you make of this recent announcement by the Canadian government about this second phase of response to the post-coup situation in Myanmar, this funding announcement of something like $288 million in new funding to be used over 3 years. This kind of reaffirms an intent to be part of the genocide case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice. Does that satisfy you? Does that go far enough?
As a matter of fact, for the $288 million, this is my thanks to the Canadian government. We were the main push, we'd say, along with some university professors out of McMaster University. We met with about 25 parliamentarians, pushed for this to happen, and we were very glad that the government of Canada recognized our request and put that into the renewal, and hence $288 million. But as far as delivering the promises, you just alluded to the International Court of Justice, and the case on the legal front. There's also one opening on the National Criminal Court. There hasn't been much delivery on that. Canada has spoken, along with Netherlands, to become party to the case, but since then we haven't heard. They've actually spoken a couple of times about being party to the case, but so far nothing has materialized. As a matter of fact, small country in West Africa, Gambia, that has taken the lead. We are thankful to them as well, but Canada can do much more.
I mean, we've been talking about the people who fled Myanmar to live in Bangladesh in hopes of something safer, and perhaps it's not totally convincing that they found something a great deal safer. What do you know about the people who didn't flee the military crackdown 5 years ago? How are they surviving in Myanmar?
I'm in touch with some of my distant relatives in Myanmar. We provide support whatever we can through informal means. But just before that, I'll make a small correction here. I will say my people in the refugee camps, every time I go, they are thankful beyond words to the Bangladeshi people and the Bangladeshi government. We cannot say that, no, they haven't found what they were looking for. I mean, what they're looking for is eventual return to their homeland and be in their own lands, be in their own homes, independent, and not rely on aid money and not have all these restrictions on education, economic activity. But in Bangladesh, at least they're able to survive, which they would not have. They would have just been exterminated. So come to the people in Myanmar. So right after the coup d'etat that took place, it's the very general who architectured the massacre. He's the one who is in charge. The other thing is there are so many other political factions that were formed and other ethnic groups that started taking arms and started now rebelling against the government, against the military regime, because the Rohingya do not have that amount of money, resources, or even arms. There's just one or two, armed militants who are very poorly armed and claim themselves to have some sort of activity, but the fact of the matter is they do not. the armed groups that are now, who formed a coalition and who are now fighting in the government, do not recognize or give much to the Rohingya because we don't have much to bring to the table. So that brings us even more marginalized back to square one where we were, or even worse, as a matter of fact, because of economic the decline, for all of the internal turmoil. It's us who are the poorest, amongst the poorest, who are feeling the brunt of the short end of the stick.
Rice, it's certainly good of you to give us some time on this afternoon. Really appreciate being able to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, too, for hosting me, and it's really a pleasure as well.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Have a nice afternoon as well.
That's Rice Tinmung, founder and board chair of the Rohingya Human Rights Network.